After inheriting about $2.4 million, I found my ex-wife crouched beside a wheel, messing with something in my garage. That's when I knew she wanted to stop me from reaching the notary office. The police arrived in 5 minutes. Before we go on, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which city you're tuning in from. There's an image from last Monday that won't let me sleep. A frozen scene on my cell phone screen that undid 21 years of fatherhood in less than 30 seconds. The reflection of my own son, the boy I raised and supported my whole life, handing a master key and a flashlight to my ex-wife in the darkness of the garage. Let me repeat this calmly, because I know you heard the weight of my words, but your mind will try to reject the monstrosity of this fact out of pure protective instinct. My own blood, young Murillo, helped cut the brake cables of my Volkswagen Santana before the sun came up, all to ensure I'd suffer a fatal accident on the highway before I could set foot in the notary office. To understand how I got to that cold Tuesday at dawn, with a shielded heart and my eyes fixed on the monitoring screen, I need you to understand exactly who I'm and the size of the contrast that fed the arrogance of the two people who lived with me. My name's Otavio Albuquerque. I'm 45 years old, and I'm a mechanical civil engineer by training. Although most of my days are spent with hands dirty with grease and arms resting on the fenders of old engines, I own a small maintenance and cylinder head grinding workshop in the South Zone of Sao Paulo. A warehouse smelling of burnt oil, cast iron, and used tow, where most of the capital's classic car owners leave their relics, knowing that the work there is done with millimeter precision. I don't wear a tailored suit. I don't frequent the trendy restaurants and jardins. And my only means of transportation for over 2 decades is a navy blue 2002 Volkswagen Santana, perfectly tuned, without a single scratch on the paint, but which, to the eyes of Sao Paulo's high society, is nothing more than a piece of obsolete metal. I wake up strictly every day at 5:30 in the morning. I make my coffee in a cloth strainer on that industrial stove I installed at the back of the warehouse, and I feel a profound peace while watching the city wake up through the iron grate on the sidewalk, the tire repairman on the corner opening the compressor, the articulated buses roaring heavily on the avenues, the hurried workers with their backpacks on. I look at all this and feel an enormous pride in my simplicity, because real life happens on the factory floor in the honesty of a well-done mechanical diagnosis and in the pledged word, which doesn't need a notary's signature to be valid. The problems that the woman I was married to for 2 decades and the son born from that relationship saw this life philosophy of mine not as a virtue, but as a terrible public shame, a sign of failure that needed to be hidden from rich friends and high-status neighbors. For almost 20 years, I let Letitia and Murillo build a narrative of appearances at my expense, allowing them to spend almost everything the workshop made to sustain a noble family facade, while I kept a huge secret, something I inherited and protected under lock and key out of pure moral precaution. I knew money changes the faces of the people around you. I knew an exposed bank balance attracts the most dangerous predators, and, for that reason, I kept my wealth hidden under the cloak of my mechanic routine. But everything really started to crumble, not when business fluctuated, but when my son Murillo's arrogance reached the peak of insolence inside the house, turning our coexistence into a true court of silent disrespect. Everything that happened in that garage, the cold sabotage, the broken cables, and the military police's intervention in less than 5 minutes only makes sense when you understand the lesson my late father left me in the countryside of Minas Gerais. My father was a mechanical turner, a man of very few words, but who treated iron with the same respect a surgeon treats the human body. I remember perfectly an afternoon in 2012 when I was still starting my journey in Sao Paulo, and the old man lost the biggest contract of his life in the Canagem region, simply because he refused to alter the thickness of a batch of industrial screws to lower the cost for a powerful client. He looked me straight in the eye, wiped his oil-dirty hands on his jeans, and said a phrase that remained stuck in my identity like a brand of fire. Otavio, whoever damages the machine of the man who gives him bread, or whoever tries to cut corners by taking away another's safety to profit faster, ends up swallowing the very poison of their own trap. The old man passed away in 2018, leaving me only 3 toolboxes of forged steel and that notebook with worn leather covers. But the ethical criteria he embedded in my head was what saved me from getting into that car on Tuesday morning. When I started accumulating the fruits of my engineering work and received the news that our family was heir to a lineage that silently accumulated assets, I decided no one in my house would know the exact value of our investments. I wanted to be seen for my character, for my ability to solve complex problems with a torque wrench in hand, and not for the volume of dividends that fell into my corporate account at the end of each quarter. Lidisha, however, married the promising engineer she met in college and spent 20 years bitter upon realizing her husband preferred the dirt floor of the mechanic's shop to the glass offices of Faria Lima Avenue. She worked as a luxury real estate broker, a profession that put her daily inside triplex penthouses and cinematic mansions in Alphaville, feeding a corrosive envy she brought into our home every night. Whenever she walked through the living room door, she'd throw her keys on the table with a latent irritation and start the veiled comparisons, praising the husbands of clients who traveled to Europe 3 times a year, or who bought Swiss watches that cost more than my grinding shop's semi-annual revenue. I listened to all that in silence, chewing my dinner with the calmness of someone who knows the size of their own structure, letting her believe we were always on the edge of the budget, just paying the monthly bills and supporting the condo fees with difficulty. This distance between what I really had saved and what she saw on my grease-stained denim pants created an insurmountable abyss, a vacuum of respect that directly contaminated our only son's mind. Murillo grew up watching his mother perform that chronic dissatisfaction, and at 18, he already treated my tools and my work with a contempt that cut my soul, although I never let the blow show. He entered the law school of a very traditional private institution, paid entirely by the sweat of my work at the workshop, and in less than 2 semesters, he already behaved as if he belonged to a superior caste, adopting the accent, the expensive brand clothes, and the habits of the children of magistrates and great lawyers from Sao Paulo. The tension inside our house reached a critical point early last year, when Murillo turned 20 and demanded I buy a brand new German-imported sedan so he could park in the college courtyard, without suffering the shame of being associated with my old Santana. I remember the conversation at the dinner table like it was today. Lidisha supported the boy's demand with demanding looks, saying appearance was the most important currency in the legal field, while the boy chewed arrogantly, waiting for my immediate capitulation. When I looked into his eyes and said my money wouldn't be spent to feed the vanity of classmates, and that he should go to college on public transport or using the Santana when it was available, the boy slammed his cutlery on the porcelain plate violently. He got up from his chair, crossed his arms, and fired the phrase that broke any bond of filial reverence still left in that environment. If you're not even good enough to fund my status and give me the minimum to stand out among my peers, I honestly don't know why you flaunt this title of father in front of me. You're a cheapskate who prefers to die hugging that Moima scrap metal than see your own son succeed. Lidisha didn't reprimand him. She didn't move a single muscle to defend my authority and just let out a sigh of boredom, wiping her mouth with a napkin, as if she literally agreed with the boy's insolence. That night, while I gathered the plates alone in the kitchen and heard their laughter in the TV room, I understood their love wasn't for the man I was, but for the financial utility I represented in their lives. It was from this trigger that the judicial separation process began to proceed. A cold transition Lidisha conducted with the haste of someone who believes they're getting rid of a heavy anchor to finally fly toward the high society she so desired. She believed that, upon signing the divorce, she'd scrape half of the mechanic's shop and the small apartment we lived in, enough to buy a minimalist flat in upscale neighborhoods, and restart life alongside people who shared her same cult of ostentation. What neither she nor the law student, Murillo, knew was that 2 weeks before the final date of the divorce signature, the law firm handling my family's inventory notified me about the release of a legitimate and definitive judicial policy. A great-uncle who had spent 50 years buying agricultural land and commercial warehouses in the state's interior had passed away without leaving direct heirs, naming my name as the sole and exclusive beneficiary of a consolidated patrimony of 12 million reis in liquid cash and paid-off real estate. The signature for the official transfer of this amount was scheduled for last Tuesday morning, at 9 o'clock at the Notary Public's office in downtown Sao Paulo, the exact day Letitia believed she'd be leaving me in the gutter with half my tools confiscated by the judge. On Monday night, a few hours before the crime, the atmosphere in our apartment exuded unbearable hostility. Letitia had already packed most of her designer clothes, and Murillo circulated through the rooms with his cell phone in hand, typing messages frantically and staring at me with a coldness that seemed to carry a terrible secret. The boy entered my private study room at the back of the house around 10 at night, pretending to look for a doctrine book, but his eyes were glued to the document folders on my desk. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to adopt a casual tone that didn't match his history of arrogance. He asked me if the Santana's maintenance was up to date. He questioned the exact time I'd leave the next morning for downtown and insisted on knowing if I'd take the highway or go through the internal avenues to escape the heavy morning traffic. I kept cleaning my reading glasses with the calmness I inherited from my Turner father. I stared at my own son's face and noticed the cold sweat running down his temples, a nervousness incompatible with a simple routine automotive question. I replied I'd leave punctually at 7 in the morning, taking the main avenue corridor to test a brake pad I myself had adjusted on the Santana the afternoon before, and turn my back to put my papers away, giving him the impression I was just a silly and predictable old man. Murillo took a step back, held the doorknob tightly, and let out a final phrase with a mocking tone that floated in the air like a terrible family prophecy. Tomorrow you won't get anywhere with that mechanic's pride of yours, you cheap old man. There are things in life that get out of our control, and destiny usually charges a very high price to those who refuse to evolve. He slammed the door hard, and the silence that settled in that room was the harbinger of the storm that had crashed down on their heads a few hours later, when the sun finally appeared on the Moima horizon. I didn't go to bed that night. I didn't lay my head on the pillow to try to sleep the sleep of the innocent, because my mechanical engineer instinct and the criteria I kept from childhood told me Murillo's question and my ex-wife's nervousness carried something much more sinister than a mere family rudeness. I sat in front of the monitoring computer, opened the high-definition security camera app, which I myself had installed hidden in strategic corners of the condo garage, and kept watching the darkness of parking spot number 42. The digital clock on the panel marked exactly 3:20 in the morning, when my eyes witnessed the scene that destroyed any remnant of compassion I still kept for that lineage. The service elevator door opened silently, and my own son's silhouette emerged in the gloom, holding a tactical flashlight and pointing the light beam directly at my Santana's front wheel, clearing the way for Letitia to swing into action with an industrial cutting tool in her hands. I watched all that with an icy calm, a coldness that rose from my feet and settled in my mind like a mechanical survival mechanism. There was no screaming, there was no despair, there was only the mathematical certainty that the foundation of that family was rotten and the fall be absolute. Letitia crouched next to the tire, cut the hydraulic brake hose with the precision of someone who knew exactly where to wound the metal to cause a catastrophic failure on the first sudden braking, while Murillo watched the car corridor with crossed arms, flaunting the same disdain he used at the dinner table. They went upstairs 10 minutes later, believing they'd sealed my fate and that the navy blue Santana turned into a steel coffin on the highway, leaving the path clear for the 12 million reis to be divided between the widow and the legitimate heir, without any legal contestation. What they forgot is that the engineer they underestimated so much knew every millimeter of that machine, and the truth always imposes itself when the criminal believes they're operating in the total invisibility of the dark. When the clock struck 6:30 in the morning, I grabbed my denim jacket, put the inheritance documents in the inner pocket, and went down to the garage warehouse with the firm steps of someone who knows exactly where to step. Mr. Agenor, the elderly mechanic who worked with my father in his youth, and who came to help me with the workshop's most complex grinding jobs, opened the back garage door at the exact moment I was examining the viscous puddle of brake fluid that had leaked under the Santana's caliper. He knelt beside me in the dust on the floor, ran his index finger through that dark oil, looked at the surgical cut made with pressure pliers on the rubber cable, and raised his white eyes with a gravity that made the garage air freeze immediately. He stood up slowly, wiped his fluid-filled fingers on an old toe he carried in his work pants pocket, and said, with a voice trembling from moral indignation, "Ottavio, my dear friend, this wasn't part wear and tear, nor a rupture by a pebble on the track. They cut your lifeline on purpose in the dead of night. They sabotage your machine with the clear intention of seeing you not make the curve on the first descent." I just squeezed old Agenor's shoulder with gratitude, pulled my cell phone from my pocket, and made a direct call to the Sao Paulo military police, reporting I'd suffered an attempted attack on my life inside my own condo, and the evidence was recorded in high definition on my internal system. The squad cars surrounded the garage exit in less than 5 minutes, blocking the Moima concierge. At the exact moment Letitia tried to pass with her executive car, carrying the crime tool hidden in her imported leather bag, Murillo ran down the social elevator right after, with his college backpack on his back. In the anxious look of someone waiting to hear the noise of a collision or the trail of a Santana without brakes on the exit ramp. What he found was the courtyard illuminated by the red and blue gyroscopes. Civil authorities isolating Spot 42 and his father, perfectly intact, standing next to old Agenor, arms crossed, and a look colder than the metal of that mechanic shop. The boy froze on the last step of the stairs. His backpack slipped off his shoulder, and all the law student arrogance vanished from his face in a fraction of a second, giving way to a cadaverous pallor that denounced guilt even before any formal interrogation. I walked slowly up to him. I stopped less than a hand's breadth away from that trembling face. I turned on my cell phone screen and pressed play on the recording, showing his direct participation in the dawn, watching the exact moment the empire of lies he built collapsed at his feet, without needing a single scream. I grabbed the keychain in his hands with a firm pull, collected the garage remote, and said with a voice that came out as calm and heavy as a cast engine block, "Your petty ambition left you with no brakes, no character, and no roof you despise so much. Murillo, starting today, you're going to learn to walk on foot on the floor of reality." The authorities handcuffed Letitia at the concierge under the perplexed looks of the high-status neighbors and escorted the boy to the support squad car to testify on charges of complicity in attempted aggravated murder. I signed the papers for my 12 million reis inheritance at the notary office in downtown Sao Paulo 2 hours later, using the same simple pen my father used to sign the work orders at the Minas Gerais workshop. In the following weeks, Letitia was transferred to a provisional detention center, where she awaits trial without bail, due to the severity of the flagrant act and the flight risk her real estate profession represented. I didn't hesitate for a single second to trigger the grinding shop's legal team to completely cut Murillo's allowance, revoke the study trust that paid for his private college within a strict 48-hour deadline, and issue an immediate eviction order for the Moima property, which was registered only in my name. The last interaction I had with my son happened in the glass visiting room of the police station, where he sat with wrinkled clothes, messy hair, and the red eyes of someone who finally realized the size of the abyss he dug for himself. He tried to cry, tried to lean on the narrative that he'd been manipulated by his mother, and begged me not to destroy his future in the legal field, asking for a portion of the inheritance to be able to pay a renowned lawyer in the capital. I just looked deep into those greedy pupils, rested my calloused hands from mechanical work on the counter, and replied with the definitive clarity of someone who closed an account that should never have been opened. "You'll never lay a hand on a single cent of those 12 million, Murillo. Your future will now be built with the weight of your own choices. And the only thing I've got to give you is the silence you disrespected so much." I turned my back, left that concrete building, and went back to my workshop in Moima to finish tuning the navy blue Santana's engine along with old Agenor Santos. We spent the afternoon working in silence, listening to the noise of the tools and the roar of the engines coming to new life under a cloth strainer on the back stove. I looked at the busy street through the iron grate, watched the modern cars passing with their noisy rush, and felt a profound peace that no amount of money could ever buy alone. The cost of discovering my own son's rottenness inside the house was immensely painful, But that dawn spared me from spending the rest of my days sharing the table and bread with my own executioners disguised as family. The hand of the workshop's wall clock marked almost 8 o'clock on Thursday night, when a metallic click of a screwdriver slipped from my calloused hand and hit the cast iron block of a 6-cylinder engine. The dry sound echoed through the peeling walls of the Moima warehouse, mixing with the hiss of the old radio, tuned to a random news station. I was alone under the yellowish light of a pendant lamp, wiping the excess grease off my arms with toes soaked in kerosene, smelling the characteristic scent of burnt oil and machined metal, which was always my true refuge. While most of the engineers from my college class filled out reports in air-conditioned rooms on Paulista Avenue, I preferred the exact diagnosis of a scratched cylinder liner or the millimeter adjustment of a valve clearance. There was an undeniable dignity in manual labor that noisy money'd never be able to replicate. A solidity that came from the factory floor, where machines don't lie and the laws of physics don't accept bribes. The problem was that this same simplicity that brought me peace served as fuel for the dishonorable spectacle of appearances Lidisha and Murillo stage daily in the Alameda Dos Maracadans apartment. I closed the forged steel toolbox with a dull thud, grabbed my denim jacket, and walked to the navy blue Volkswagen Santana, parked near the iron gate. The engine ran smoothly on the first turn of the key, a soft and steady roar that attested to my hours of dedication tuning the electronic injection. Driving that car through the quiet streets of Sao Paulo's South Zone was an exercise in social invisibility I cultivated with extreme zeal, because I knew in the state capital people usually measure the size of your character by the year printed on your vehicle's registration. For the valets of the sophisticated restaurants, where Lidisha tried to carve out space, or for the doormen of high-end buildings, where she negotiated triplex penthouses. That 2002 Santana was just a visual nuisance, a piece of obsolete metal that denounced the supposed financial mediocrity of the mechanic husband, who accepted the sidelong glances with icy serenity. Parking the car in the most distant spots and observing human behavior without the filter of flattery that surrounds the true millionaires of Faria Lima Avenue. What my ex-wife classified as chronic lack of ambition was, in fact, a moral shield I used to map the depth of interest of those who lived with me. Upon parking the Santana in spot number 42 in our building's basement, the silence of the reinforced concrete was broken by the echo of Murillo's hurried steps, heading towards the elevator, carrying a genuine leather briefcase I'd bought for his first day of internship. The boy didn't even take his eyes off his cell phone screen to greet me. He just clicked his tongue in irritation upon realizing my work clothes exuded the persistent odor of lubricating oil. He climbed the 3 steps of the social ramp, keeping a carefully calculated distance from my shoulder, as if the proximity to my jacket's dirty denim could contaminate the imported fabric of the polo shirt he flaunted with juvenile pride. We entered the residential elevator under the weight of a suffocating mutism, where the only audible sound was the creaking of the steel cables going up to the 5th floor and the beep of notifications flashing nonstop on the law student's device. I looked at my own son's reflection in the cabin mirror, noting the hard lines of his jaw and the haste with which he adjusted his collar, realizing the boy I taught to ride a bike had turned into a complete stranger fueled by academic vanity. The apartment door opened, and the scene we found in the living room seemed straight out of a luxury real estate catalog Lidisha collected with true obsession. Bags from sophisticated department stores were scattered on the raw linen sofa, and the glass coffee table displayed 3 catalogs of residential art and jewelry auctions my ex-wife examined with a gold pen between her fingers. She raised her almond-shaped eyes in my direction, measuring my tired face with that expression of boredom that had become the visual signature of our marriage in the last 5 years. Lidisha didn't ask how business was at the grinding shop. She didn't question the fatigue stamped on my forehead and limited herself to dragging the bags to the corner, clearing space with a harshness that communicated her deepest contempt for my professional universe. I spent the whole afternoon with the wife of an investment fund director showing a penthouse in Vila Nova Conceição, Otavio, And I confess I feel an indescribable shame when I remember my husband spent the whole day washing engine parts with kerosene in a filthy warehouse. She fired, throwing the pen on the table with an irritated snap. Murillo let out a restrained laugh from the corner of the room, tossing his leather briefcase on the sideboard and serving himself a glass of mineral water, imported with the typical petulance of someone who considered himself the sole heir of good taste in that house. I rested my calloused hands on the back of the dining room chair, feeling the physical contrast between my fingers' thick skin and the shiny varnish of the furniture Letitia had paid for in 12 installments on the workshop's credit card. I kept my tone of voice perfectly level, refusing to enter the terrain of the histrionic argument she tried to pave to justify her historic bitterness. I only replied that the kerosene from that filthy workshop was what kept the law school tuition rigorously up to date, and what guaranteed the condo fees of that Moema building wouldn't go into judicial execution at the end of each quarter. Letitia's face hardened instantly, her nostrils flaring with the fury of someone who hated being confronted with the cold math of facts by a man she considered intellectually inferior. Dinner passed under the aegis of a silent hostility, a mechanical ritual where the noise of cutlery against porcelain plates seemed to dictate the rhythm of our mutual emotional distance. Murillo ate, keeping his eyes glued to the phone screen, typing messages with feverish speed and exchanging complicit looks with his mother whenever I made mention of commenting on some structural renovation the workshop need to undergo in the coming weeks. It was clear the two operated on a parallel frequency, a fine-tuning of disdain fed by years of appearance narratives and lame excuses that Letitia invented for rich relatives when I refused to attend Sunday lunches wearing clothes that didn't belong to me. I saw the gear of arrogance working in my son's mind. Realizing how coexistence with the heirs of the capital's great law firms had anesthetized the respect he should have had for the man who spent nights calculating grinding quotes to guarantee his livelihood. When the clock struck 10 at night, Murillo got up from the table without clearing his own plate, walked to the apartment balcony, and turned on his cell phone light to read a document he'd taken from the bottom of his canvas backpack. The cold breeze of the Sao Paulo night blew the silk curtains of the living room, and through the reflection of the display cabinet glass, I managed to notice the paper my son examined so carefully displayed a dark blue letterhead, very similar to the official forms used by the family courts of the Court of Justice. Letitia approached him with soft steps, touching the boy's shoulder, with a conspiratorial familiarity that made me hold the fork with a little more pressure than necessary. They whispered in an almost inaudible tone, but the dining room's acoustics allowed me to catch isolated fragments of a conversation that seemed to revolve around legal deadlines, division of physical assets, and the commercial valuation of the Moema warehouse. I got up from the chair with the same deliberate calmness I used to calibrate a torque wrench at the grinding shop. I walked to the kitchen to leave the dirty dishes in the sink and pass through the side hallway, keeping my rubber slippers glued to the floor so as not to alert the two about my physical proximity. Approaching the balcony entrance under the pretext of closing the glass window to block the cold wind, I noticed Murillo try to hide the letterhead document behind his back with a visible startle, while Letitia's face immediately assumed a defensive rigidity. The boy cleared his throat nervously, his long fingers slightly crumpling the edge of the letterhead paper, while trying to hold my gaze with that fake arrogance he used to mask his juvenile insecurity in the face of my paternal authority. Letitia took a step forward, putting her body between me and our son, sporting a tense smile that couldn't reach the brown eyes staring at me with pure real estate suspicion. We're just reviewing some civil law articles Murillo needs to present in class tomorrow morning. Otavio, something complex about real estate contracts that you'd certainly find extremely boring, she said, crossing her arms over her silk blouse. To close the subject, I kept my hand resting on the sliding window latch, keeping my eyes fixed on the crumpled sheet sticking out from behind the boy's jacket, noticing perfectly the word divorce, printed in huge black letters at the top of the sheet he tried to hide in the balcony's gloom. A silence loaded with static electricity took over the balcony for a few seconds. The kind of dramatic pause where any false move could anticipate the confrontation I needed to postpone at all costs until the 12 million policy was legally secured in my name. I released the window latch smoothly. I forced the lines of my face to relax into an expression of indifference, tiredness, and just replied that the Moima wind usually brought a lot of dust to the living room rugs, and they should finish studying in the internal office. I turned my back without showing a single millimeter of hesitation. I walked towards my study room and locked the wooden door with a soft click, feeling the adrenaline pulse in my temples, while the chessboard of that domestic betrayal was drawn with mathematical clarity. I sat in the wicker rocking chair, which belonged to my Turner father. I rested my elbows on my knees and stared at the darkness of the building's inner courtyard through the half-open shutter. It was evident Letitia had already set the separation process in motion behind the back of my work routine, using her own son's legal knowledge to structure a legal trap aimed at confiscating the workshop, warehouse, and the apartment we lived in under the claim of leaving me without resources to contest the lawsuit. What the two appearance strategists couldn't conceive in their upper-middle-class arrogance was that the silent mechanic they despised at the dinner table already had the counterattack perfectly drawn in the inner pocket of his denim jacket. The cell phone clock vibrated discreetly at midnight, bringing a short, encrypted text message from the central Sao Paulo law firm, which handled the interests of my family's lineage. The notification on the dark screen displayed only a numerical scheduling code and a definitive instruction that made my spine align with the rigidity of forged steel. The hearing for the approval of the 12 million Reyes bank transfer was confirmed for next Tuesday, exactly at 9 in the morning at the capital's third notary office. I put the device away in the desk drawer, under a pile of diesel engine technical manuals, feeling the weight of that information settle in my chest, like the certainty that the time of illusion had come to an end for all of us in that house. Upon getting up to get a glass of water in the kitchen before trying to rest, I heard the muffled whisper coming from Murillo's room at the end of the hallway, a hissing sound indicating that the intelligence center of that sabotage kept operating in the dead of the Sao Paulo night. I brought my ear closer to the crack of the wooden door with the care of a mechanical surgeon listening for the blow of a defective valve inside a cylinder block. My son's voice came out clear, loaded with a calculating coldness, making me realize the 21 years of paternal dedication had been completely deleted by the promise of a life of material ease alongside his mother. The lawyer said if the Santana suffers a severe mechanical breakdown, or if the old man fails to attend the divorce conciliation hearing due to any force majeure, we can get an injunction for possession of the Moima warehouse in less than 48 hours. Mom, the boy whispered with dark enthusiasm. Letitia's response came next. A harsh tone devoid of any trace of humanity definitively sealed the fate of that entire lineage in my ethical consideration. He's too predictable, Murillo. He always wakes up at the same time and always takes the same driving route. We just need to ensure he stops before he manages to sign any contestation with that grinding shop lawyer, replied my ex-wife in the darkness of the room. I moved my face away from the door slowly. I returned to my study isolation, without making the slightest noise on the hardwood floor, and lay on the bed with my eyes wide open, staring at the room's plaster ceiling. While her phrase floated in the air like an imminent threat I'd need to disarm with surgical precision. Before the next morning's sun appeared on the avenue, the smell of old grease mixed with stale cornmeal cake crumbs permeated the workshop's back pantry on Friday morning, while old Iginor cleaned a fuel injector nozzle with the tip of a thin wire. The traffic noise from Iberpura Avenue started to leak through the cracks in the zinc roof, creating a constant buzz that dictated the rhythm of the start of our shift. I had my denim overalls tied at the waist, washing my hands with that reddish sand paste we used to rip heavy oil off our skin, watching the precise movements of that gentleman who worked without haste. Iginor wasn't just the oldest employee in the warehouse. He carried on his face the same expression marks I used to see on my late father when we both spent Saturday afternoons adjusting mechanical lathes in the Minas Gerais countryside. The old man rested his elbows on the dark wooden bench, adjusted his glasses patched with electrical tape on the bridge of his nose and blue on the metal part, with the precision of someone who knew a single grain of dust in there would ruin an entire block's compression. That manual routine brought me back to solid ground Litisha, and Murillo tried to implode at all costs in the sterile environment of Alameda dos Miracadins. While I wiped the bench with Old Toe, the image of my mechanical Turner father, who passed away in 2018, gained an almost palpable clarity in my memory, bringing with it the weight of that leather notebook I still kept at the bottom of the workshop's steel cabinet. I remembered specifically a rainy morning when a large transport company from Conagem offered an absurd payment for the old man to sign a fake report, attesting to the safety of a fleet of trucks with chassis visibly cracked by weight overload. The old man locked the warehouse door, put the money back in the company representative's envelope, and said, with the gentle voice of someone who didn't need to shout to impose their dignity, that iron accepted the farce for a few kilometers, but the road always exacted the price of the lie, covering the asphalt with the blood of the innocent. That lesson of raw honesty, which in childhood seemed to me just the stubbornness of an old worker, turned into the exact filter allowing me to see my ex-wife's and my son's movements, without falling into the trap of despair or violent reaction. Around 10 in the morning, the noise of the navy blue Volkswagen Santana's starter interrupted the silence of the assembly area. A sign old Agenor had already completed the preventive maintenance I'd requested the afternoon before. I walked to the side of the vehicle, ran my hand over the smooth and perfectly aligned fender, feeling the heat of the engine spinning in a rhythm so exact it looked like the mechanism of a Swiss wall clock. It was at this exact moment Murillo's lanky silhouette appeared in the opening of the sidewalk iron gate, wearing a perfectly ironed light blue dress shirt and carrying that fake arrogance he used as a shield whenever he needed to step into my work environment. The boy didn't enter the warehouse right away. He stood near the curb, looking at the oil puddles on the floor with visible disgust, tapping the tip of his leather shoe on the cement, as if counting the seconds to get rid of that working-class neighborhood. He walked towards me, keeping his arms crossed to avoid contact with any dirty surface, clearing his throat with a forced cough before holding out a rigid, transparent plastic folder he kept hidden under his arm. Mom asked you to sign these property inspection reports pending in the process's division of assets, Otavio. And she said if you don't file this today, the judge will understand you're trying to hide the workshop's assets to delay the lawsuit's progress, said the boy, using my first name, with a legal coldness that made old Agenor stop tightening a connecting rod bolt at the back of the workshop. I kept the toe in my hand, measuring the law student's face, with a calmness I inherited from my Turner father, noticing my son's long fingers trembled slightly on the edge of the plastic folder. I took the papers smoothly, rested the sheets on the Santana's hood, and started leafing through the real estate descriptions Litisha had written based on inflated appraisals, whose sole purpose was to force me to sell the warehouse to cover a non-existent compensation. While I scanned the abusive clauses, I noticed that among the inspection reports there was a small yellow paper draft with handwritten notes by my ex-wife, containing a residential address that made my spine align immediately. It was the exact address of the law firm in downtown Sao Paulo, where my family inheritance's $12 million were being processed in total secrecy. Adrenaline rushed up my back like an electric current, and for a fraction of a second, my mask of indifference almost gave way to the panic of realizing Litisha might have discovered the financial policy before the deadline for signing at the notary office. I needed to hide that yellow draft before Murillo noticed the note's content. But the boy had his eyes fixed on my movements, leaning his body forward with a latent suspicion denouncing he knew exactly what was written on that smaller paper. I fake a severe coughing fit because of the kerosene on the bench. I reach in my denim jacket pocket to get a handkerchief. In a quick and carefully calculated movement, I pull the yellow draft along with the inspection sheets, crumpling it in the palm of my grease-stained hand. Before the boy could protest, Murillo furrowed his thick eyebrows, took a step forward with clenched fists, and extended his arm towards my chest, demanding to know what I'd put away so hurriedly in that inner jacket pocket. "What did you hide there, Otavio?" I saw perfectly well there was a note from Mom among these inspection documents, and I demand you return that sheet to me right now, Because you don't have the right to retain any legal instruction from our office, the young man fired with a tone of voice bordering on academic insolence. I pulled my shoulder back smoothly, kept my hands flat on the Santana's metal, and replied with a voice that came out as firm and level as the spirit level we use to align cylinder blocks. I said the yellow sheet was nothing more than an old reminder with a quote for the brake pads old Agenor had bought at the corner auto parts store, and if he wanted to check the values, I could take him personally to the supplier's counter so he could confirm the materials invoice. The boy held my gaze for a few seconds that seemed to last an eternity in the silence of the workshop, his eyes sweeping my denim jacket with a corrosive suspicion, but the absolute certainty with which I maintained my mechanical lie made him pull his body back with an irritated click of his tongue. He snatched the plastic folder back with a sharp pull, adjusted his dress shirt collar with both hands, and walked towards the warehouse exit, without saying goodbye to old Agenor or looking at the tools that supported his standard of living in the capital. You're still the same old cheapskate, Ottavio, thinking the world is solved by changing old car oil, while real people are deciding the future in important offices. Sign these papers by the end of the afternoon, or the consequences in court will be terrible for your workshop, he shouted before disappearing on the busy Moima sidewalk. I let the air out slowly through my mouth, uncrumpled the yellow sheet in my pocket, and read Letitia's scribbles, confirming she'd scheduled a consultation with a private investigator to track any strange banking activity on my CPF in the last 2 weeks. The danger was circling my inheritance with frightening speed, and the proximity of that real estate investigation meant my family's secrecy's days were numbered if I didn't act before the detective cross-referenced the tax data. The rest of the afternoon passed under the weight of a silent urgency, a feverish rhythm, where every starter motor we tested seemed to count the time I had left until Tuesday dawn. When the clock struck 7 at night, I closed the warehouse's iron doors, made sure old Agenor had already taken the bus to the railway branch, and sat in front of the wooden desk to examine the yellow draft under the light of the metal lamp. It was clear Letitia already suspected my apparent tranquility regarding the divorce hid some financial strategy she still couldn't decipher through my grease-stained pants. I pulled my cell phone from the steel drawer, checked the digital files the law firm had sent me for security, and confirmed all negative debt certificates were already perfectly issued in my name, ready to be presented to the notary downtown. However, the whisper I heard the previous dawn about the Santana's mechanical breakdown kept hammering in my head as a warning the two wouldn't wait for the normal legal process to take control of my professional assets. I grabbed the car keys, turned off the workshop lights, and drove the Volkswagen Santana back to the residential condo on Alameda dos Miracadins, paying extra attention to any strange noise coming from the suspension system or the hydraulic brakes. The South Zone streets were taken over by the slow flow of workers returning home, a scene of red headlights and shrill horns sharply contrasting with the cold quietness awaiting me inside my own apartment. Upon parking the vehicle in basement spot number 42, I noticed Letitia's executive SUV was already positioned in the spot next door, the still-hot engine clicking with the cooling of the aluminum block, indicating she'd arrived a few minutes from her real estate workday. I grabbed my leather briefcase with the workshop work orders. I made sure the vehicle was perfectly locked and walked towards the elevator hall, keeping my steps slow to monitor the reinforced concrete parking environment. The cabin went up silently to the 5th floor, and, opening the wooden apartment door, I noticed the living room lights were off, keeping the environment in gloom only broken by the yellowish lighting coming from the external avenue posts. The house's silence was dense, almost palpable, interrupted only by the muffled sound coming from the master bedroom's main closet, where Letitia used to keep her international designer travel bags. I approached the side hallway with the care of someone defusing a time bomb in a cylinder block, stepping on the corners of the wooden floorboards to avoid any creak that could alert my ex-wife about my physical presence in the room. Through the crack in the half-open closet door, I managed to visualize the dark without any visible label, whose liquid content she examined against the lamplight, with an expression of extreme, calculating concentration. Murillo was sitting on the edge of the bed with an open notebook on his lap, typing with a nervous haste that made the plastic keys click in the darkness of the room, while keeping his eyes fixed on a state highway map, displaying on the high-definition screen. The boy raised his head towards his mother, ran his hand through his messy hair, with a gesture of pure anxiety, and spoke in a whispered tone of voice, making my blood retreat immediately to the center of my calloused chest. The transport company contact guaranteed this chemical compound reacts with the original hydraulic fluid in less than 4 hours of internal contact. Mom, corroding the master cylinder's rubber seals, leaving no visible trace for a common traffic forensic exam, said the law student with a dark smile, denouncing the absolute loss of any ethical limit in that academic mind. Letitia put the dark bottle at the bottom of her imported leather bag, closed the metal zipper with a sharp snap, and replied with that cold voice devoid of any trace of humanity that had become the soundtrack of my family ruin. He'll leave on Tuesday at 7 in the morning, like he always does, Murillo. And when he steps on the brake pedal going down the main highway overpass, the pressure will completely disappear and the old Santana won't be able to stop before the curve's concrete barrier, stated my ex-wife in the gloom of the closet. I moved my face away from the door crack with surgical calmness. I returned to the entrance hallway without making the slightest noise with my work shoes and slammed the front living room door hard to simulate I just entered the apartment after the workday at the grinding shop. The sound of the door thud made the whispers in the room cease instantly. And when Letitia appeared in the living room hallway, sporting that tense real estate broker smile, I stared at her with my eyes fixed on the leather bag strap, which she still held firmly between her long fingers. Knowing the bottle for my potential automotive execution was already perfectly stored inside, just waiting for the exact moment of darkness to swing into action in the basement parking spot, clinking silver cutlery against imported ceramic plates, dictating the tense rhythm of Saturday lunch at the dining room table. Letitia cut the piece of meat with surgical precision, keeping her half-closed eyes focused on my face, while Murillo adjusted the linen napkin over his tailoring pants with undisguised disdain. The strong midday light passed through the Moima balcony window, illuminating the gold pen marks my ex-wife had made on the real estate pamphlets scattered on the sideboard. The silence settling between the decorated walls was dense, broken only by the mechanical noise of the refrigerator compressor and the short taps my son made with his fingers on the glass edge of his mineral water glass. I chewed my food with the typical slowness of someone who spent their youth calibrating precision gears, keeping my face perfectly neutral. Although I knew beneath that forced end-of-marriage cordiality, there was a sinister plan to irreparably sabotage my Santana's master cylinder. "You're very quiet today, Ottavio. You barely touched the reports Murillo took to the workshop. And I confess this lack of interest of yours in the division of assets is starting to look like a legal provocation." Letitia fired, putting the knife down with a dull thud, making the table tremble slightly. I wiped my mouth with a napkin, observed the perfect crease of Murillo's dress shirt, and replied with a voice that came out at the same calibration level I used to adjust valves at the grinding shop. I said my silence was just the accumulated tiredness of someone who spent the week machining aluminum blocks, and the workshop's pending issues would be resolved in the exact time established by the lawyers, without the need for rushing or unnecessary pressure during the weekend. The boy let out a sigh of boredom, adjusted the wristwatch gleaming under the sunlight, and exchanged a complicit look with his mother, crossing his arms with that typical haughtiness of someone who believed his mechanic father was nothing more than a disposable obstacle on the path to social ascension in the capital. "The deadline for filing the inspections ends on Monday afternoon, Dad. And if you keep acting like a cheapskate who prefers to spend hours cleaning old Santana parts than signing the separation documents, I myself will request the judge's intervention in the warehouse." Murillo interjected, using an aggressive intonation that made my calloused hands close firmly under the linen tablecloth. He jumped up from his chair abruptly, walked to the dark wooden display cabinet, and started looking for the corkscrew in the cutlery drawer, with a nervous haste dilating his internal anxiety. It was at this exact moment the danger of revelation almost destroyed my family's secrecy. My cell phone, resting on the American kitchen's marble counter, vibrated intensely upon receiving a phone call, illuminating the high-definition screen with the full name of the downtown Sao Paulo Notary Public. Murillo, who was less than 1 meter from the device, extended his long arm quickly to grab the phone, his eyes sweeping the display, with that academic suspicion he'd been cultivating since he started reviewing the divorce papers. "Who is this doctor calling you on a day off Saturday, Otavio?" His name appears associated with the third notary office, and I demand to know if you're trying to make any asset movement. "Without our law firm's knowledge," exclaimed the boy, his fingers touching the side of the display before I could move. Adrenaline shot up my back, like oil under high pressure in a crankcase, and for a fraction of a second, I realized if my son swiped the screen to answer, the notary's voice would confirm the approval of the 12 million Reyes inheritance, to be signed on Tuesday morning. I got up with a mechanical agility belying my 45 years. I reached out my hand dirty from workwear and snatched the cell phone from Murillo's fingers with a firm pull, making his notebook wobble on the linen sofa. I disconnected the call, pressing the side button hard, stared at the law student's pale face, and replied with a technical lie I formulated with the precision of a mechanical engineering project. I said the doctor in question was just the insurance automotive appraiser, who was evaluating the market value of a hydraulic winch I intended to buy for the Moima workshop, and the association with the notary office was just a registry mistake in the phone's database. Murillo furrowed his thick eyebrows, measuring my denim jacket full of suspicion and arrogance. But the icy coldness with which I maintained the lie made him pull his body back, throwing the corkscrew on the counter with an irritated snap. "You're pathetic, Otavio. Spending your whole life negotiating scrap and old tools with corner appraisers, while the luxury real estate market is spinning millions in front of us," Letitia sneered from the table, wiping her fingers on her silk blouse with a haughtiness sealing her total inability to see beyond material appearances. She grabbed her imported leather bag from the sideboard, adjusted her brown hair in the entrance hall mirror, and walked towards the front door accompanied by Murillo, warning they'd spend the whole afternoon visiting a sales stand in the Jardins area. I remained standing in the American kitchen until I heard the muffled sound of the service elevator closing in the hallway, letting the air out slowly through my mouth and feeling the cold sweat run down my temples, while the chessboard of that family betrayal consolidated in the basement darkness. I walked to the study room at the back of the apartment. I locked the wooden door with a soft click and pulled my late father's notebook from the steel drawer to reorganize my actions based on the criteria I inherited from him in the Minas Gerais countryside. The lesson about never reacting in the heat of the moment and always examining a machine's seals before starting it was what kept me stable, while my ex-wife and my own blood planned the destruction of my Santana on the highway. I opened the hidden cameras monitoring app on spot 42 on my cell phone, confirming the navy blue vehicle remained perfectly intact under the dim light of the reinforced concrete parking lot. But the conversation I heard in the closet about the corrosive chemical compound indicated the attack of the two would occur in the dead of Monday night. I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the grinding shop's active contracts and the workshop's financial balance sheets, ensuring no legal loophole could be used by Murillo to block the signature of the 12 million transfer at the downtown notary office. The legal engineering I set up in total secrecy with the central Sao Paulo office was armored, but the real danger didn't come from the paragraphs of the law, but from litigious materialistic madness, who was willing to cut the rubber brake cables to turn me into a traffic statistic going down the overpass. I looked through the room's half-open shutter, watching the Sao Paulo night swallow the Moima neighborhood, with its yellow lighting and the shrill noise of the avenues that never sleep, feeling every passing minute brought me closer to the definitive conclusion of that domestic farce. When the clock struck almost 10 at night, Letitia's heel steps echoed in the apartment's entrance hallway, accompanied by Murillo's restrained laugh, who seemed to celebrate the success of some real estate transaction they'd articulated during Saturday. I remained secluded in the gloom of my study office, keeping the lights off so as not to attract the attention of the two, letting them believe the predictable mechanic was already sleeping the heavy sleep of the ignorant. It was in this instant of absolute silence inside the house, the hissing sound of a whisper in the side hallway made me bring my ear closer to the wooden door crack with the surgical care of someone monitoring the pressure of a defective cylinder block. Lidish's voice came out clear through the door plywood, loaded with that harshness, devoid of any trace of humanity that had become the soundtrack of our home in the last 5 years of failed coexistence. The private investigator managed to confirm Ottavio was downtown, talking to a lawyer specializing in large family inventories last Wednesday, Murillo, and I'm absolutely certain that Cheapskate is hiding a much larger patrimony than the grinding shop tools, stated my ex-wife with an ambitious urgency in her voice. Murillo let out an irritated tongue click. The sound of his steps approaching the entrance of my office made me pull my body back millimeter by millimeter so as not to be discovered in the room's darkness. That cheap old man doesn't have the intelligence to hide anything of value behind our backs, Mom. But if he's trying to divert resources from the workshop to avoid the divorce division of assets, the chemical compound bottle I got from the transport company will resolve this insolence before he manages to file any appeal in court, whispered the boy with a dark enthusiasm, denouncing the absolute loss of any ethical limit. Silence took over the hallway again for a few seconds while the two walked towards the master suite, leaving in the air the echo of that cold confession, sealing the fate of their entire lineage in my moral consideration. I remained motionless in the gloom of the office, feeling the discreet volume of the inheritance documents against my chest. Knowing Lidish's private detective's investigation had come too close to the truth, and the time to act in the basement garage was definitively running out before Monday's sun appeared on the Moima horizon. The shrill ring of the living room landline cut the house's heavy silence at 7 on Monday night, making Lidisha jump from the raw linen sofa with a visibly startled face. She answered the device with nervous haste, holding the plastic mouthpiece with long, trembling fingers, while her brown eyes swept the hallway where I was walking with my leather workshop briefcase. I was coming from the bathroom after washing my neck to remove the soot residue from the grinding shop, keeping my rubber slippers glued to the hardwood floor to monitor her reaction without showing any kind of mechanical suspicion. Murillo appeared from the American kitchen right after, holding an imported soda can, the law student's face locked in an expression of pure conspiratorial anxiety, confirming the duo's alignment in the final stretch of that domestic sabotage. "Yes, it's me. You can tell me the details of the tax tracking report we contracted for his CPF," said my ex-wife in a tone of voice she tried to lower as much as possible, although our dining room's excellent acoustics allowed every phoneme to echo clearly in the room. I stopped halfway down the hall under the pretext of adjusting the wall picture, keeping my denim jacket stretched over my chest, feeling the discreet volume of the negative certificates from the notary office I'd stored there after my shift at the Moima workshop. Adrenaline started circulating feverishly through my arteries when I realized the call came directly from the private investigator's office. Lidisha had hired a snoop on my banking activity. The chessboard was closing, and the imminence of a discovery on her part endangered the signature of the 12 million reais transfer happening the next morning in downtown Sao Paulo. Lidisha hung up the phone with a sharp snap, turned in my direction with an expression of materialistic triumph, and walked to the glass coffee table, where Murillo already awaited her with crossed arms, with that typical haughtiness of young people who considered themselves intellectually superior. The boy took a sip of the drink with disdain, measured my grease-stained denim pants, with thick eyebrows furrowed, and fired a direct accusation, making the room's air freeze instantly. "The detective just confirmed your tax registry suffered a change in asset status last Wednesday, Ottavio. And we know perfectly well a cheap Moima mechanic doesn't receive notifications from the Central Forum unless he's hiding resources from the divorce division of assets," exclaimed the young man, extending his long hand toward my jacket, with a legal insolence testing the limits of my emotional control. It was in this exact instant the danger of revelation almost imploded my entire family secrecy. My fingers, calloused by mechanical work, had let the tip of a dark blue letterhead envelope stick out of the garment's inner pocket. The exact document with the third notary office's scheduling code. Murillo noticed the piece of thick paper, took a step forward with clenched fists, and tried to snatch the sheets from my chest with a quick movement, betraying his total lack of filial reverence. If he laid eyes on those huge letters, the farce of the broke husband would end before dawn, and Letitia'd trigger an urgent injunction to freeze my corporate accounts before the clock marked the real estate hearing time. I pulled my left shoulder back with the millimeter precision of someone dodging a piston on the grinding bench, slapped my right palm against Murillo's arm to fend off his attack, and replied with a lie. Technical formulated with the icy coldness I inherited from my mechanical Turner father. I said the blue paper was just the merchandise circulation tax collection guide old Agenor had issued for the delivery of a batch of machine cylinder heads, and if he tried to tear that tax document, the workshop be fined by state revenue that same night. To give truth to the staging, I pulled a digital workshop stopwatch from my waist we used to measure engine firing time. I threw it on the American Kitchen's marble with a metallic thud and started dictating isolated pressure and torque numbers, as if reviewing a complex mechanical report. Murillo froze with his arm extended in the air, the boy's face oscillating between academic arrogance and practical ignorance about the bureaucratic functioning of a Moima grinding shop, allowing me to push the envelope deep into the lining with an imperceptible movement. You're still a complete brute, Ottavio, wasting your time with guides for old Santana parts, while the legal world is about to rip away half of everything you built in that filthy warehouse, sneered Letitia, adjusting her silk blouse with a haughtiness sealing her totality of facts. She signaled to her son with her head, grabbed the real estate pamphlets from the table, and retreated to the master suite, accompanied by the law student, warning they needed to review the last clauses of the petition they'd file in the next 48 hours. I walked slowly to my study room at the back of the apartment. I locked the wooden lock with a soft click and collapsed in the wicker chair with my temples throbbing hard due to the adrenaline rush that almost ruined my family inheritance strategy. I opened my father's notebook under the dim light of the metal lamp, seeking in that Minas Gerais worker's old handwriting the emotional stability necessary to get through the darkest hours preceding the decisive Tuesday. The lesson about never showing strength before the exact moment of impact was what kept my muscles relaxed, while my own blood and the woman I share my life with plan my automotive execution on the highway. I turned on the cell phone screen with the brightness reduced to the minimum. I accessed the hidden cameras monitoring app for Spot 42 and confirmed the navy blue Volkswagen Santana remained perfectly isolated under the basement's reinforced concrete, but the corrosive chemical bottle I saw in the closet indicated dawn be the chosen setting for the crime. If you want to witness how justice bends the greedy without needing to raise its voice, subscribe to the channel now, because I guarantee you won't regret following every step of this legal plot twist. The digital clock on my study computer panel marked exactly 2 in the morning, when the apartment silence was broken by the almost imperceptible click of the front living room door being opened slowly and carefully. I got up from the wicker chair without making the slightest noise with my socks on the hardwood floor. I approached the hallway shutter and observed 2 dark silhouettes sliding towards the elevator hall, carrying a black canvas backpack between their hands. Letitia wore a dark hooded coat to hide her features on the condo monitoring, and Murillo held a high-intensity tactical flashlight, with his long fingers glued to the plastic switch to avoid any stray light beam on the path. They took the service elevator, keeping that fine-tuning of disdain, which they perfected over years of silent disrespect at our Moima dinner table. I returned to the wooden desk. I turned on the high-definition monitor of the hidden cameras, which I myself had installed in the corners of the garage, and zoomed the framing directly on the left side of my navy blue Santana. The black and white digital image displayed the basement concrete in the total quiet of the Sao Paulo dawn until the fire escape door opened slowly, revealing my own son's face, pointing the light beam directly at the front wheel brake caliper. Letitia knelt in the dust on the floor with a calculating coldness, making my engineer's heart set in an icy calibration. Pulling from inside the canvas backpack, those industrial pressure pliers and the chemical compound bottle, without a visible label, she'd gotten with the transport company contact. The law student remained standing with his arms crossed, keeping his eyes fixed on the car corridor to guarantee the security of the criminal operation, flaunting the same arrogant look he used when disdaining my manual work at the grinding shop. I watched through the monitor the exact moment Letitia cut the rubber seal of the hydraulic hose, with the precision of someone who knew where to wound the metal to cause a catastrophic failure in the pedal, as soon as the car reached the main highway speed. They wiped the oil traces with an old tow, put the tools away in a canvas backpack, and returned to the elevator, believing they'd sealed the predictable mechanic's fate, and the 12 million reis would be inherited by the widow and the legitimate heir, without any legal contestation in court. What the two appearance strategists forgot is the laws of mechanics don't accept a farce, and the silent engineer knew every millimeter of that machine they classified as a Moima visual nuisance. When the clock struck 6 on Tuesday morning, I put on my denim jacket, checked the envelope with the notary certificates in the inner pocket, and went down the stairs with the firm steps of someone who knows exactly where the truth imposes itself. Stepping on the basement concrete, I noticed the dark, viscous stain of brake fluid that had leaked under the Santana's fender, an unmistakable trail of sabotage, textually confirming the content of the conspiratorial conversation I'd monitored in the closet crack. Old Agenor Santos appeared from the back garage door the exact instant I was examining the hydraulic oil puddle, carrying his forged steel toolbox, and with his face marked by the gravity of someone who'd worked with my Turner father in their youth, and mine as Jure. The old mechanic knelt beside me in the dust, ran his index finger through that dark liquid dripping down the suspension's smooth metal, smelled the persistent odor of the corrosive chemical compound, and raised his white eyes with an expression of horror, making the parking lot air freeze immediately. He wiped his grease-filled fingers on an old toe with hands trembling from moral indignation. He gripped my denim arm tightly and uttered the definitive phrase, setting the mechanism of justice in rapid motion against the two traitors in the house. Otavio, my dear friend, this here wasn't a natural wear of the part, nor a rupture by a pebble on the main avenue track. They cut your lifeline with pressure pliers in the dead of night. They injected a corrosive acid into the rubber seals, with the clear intention of seeing your Santana go straight on the first sharp curve of the road, stated old Agenor with his voice choked by the ethical shock. I squeezed the old mechanic's shoulder with gratitude, pulled my cell phone from my pocket, and made a direct call to the Sao Paulo Military Police, reporting the attack on my life and confirming the evidence was perfectly recorded in high definition on my internal security system. The squad car surrounded the garage exit in less than 5 minutes, the red and blue gyroscopes illuminating the basement concrete the exact instant Letitia tried to pass through the concierge with her executive SUV, carrying the black canvas backpack with the crime tools hidden in the back seat. Murillo ran down the social elevator right after, with his law school backpack on his back, and the anxious look of someone expecting to find only the trail of a tragic collision on the avenue's exit ramp. The boy froze on the last step of the cement stairs upon coming face to face with civil authorities, isolating spot 42, and with his father, perfectly intact, standing next to old Agenor Santos, arms crossed, and a look colder than the metal of that Moima mechanical grinding shop. All the academic arrogance vanished from the law student's face in a fraction of a second, giving way to a cadaverous pallor. Denouncing guilt before any formal interrogation by the police officers on duty. I walked slowly towards him. I stopped less than a hand's breadth away from that trembling face, turned on my cell phone screen, and pressed play on the Dawn recording, watching the exact moment his direct participation in the sabotage was exposed without needing to raise my voice once in the room. I pulled the apartment keys attached to his belt loop with a firm yank. I collected the magnetic garage remote and said with a voice that came out as calm and heavy as a cast engine block, "Your petty ambition left you with no brakes, no character, and no roof you despised so much at the dinner table. Murillo, starting today, the squad cars will escort you to the floor of legal reality." The police handcuffed Letitia at the concierge, under the perplexed looks of the high-status neighbors, and escorted the boy to the back seat of the patrol car to testify under the formal accusation of complicity in attempted aggravated murder for a vile motive. I attended the notary office in downtown Sao Paulo 2 hours later to sign the official transfer of the 12 million reais of my family inheritance, using the same simple pen my father used to sign work orders in Conagem. In the following weeks, Letitia had her request for provisional release denied by the judge due to the severity of the flagrant act and the evident risk of concealing real estate evidence her luxury broker profession facilitated in the capital. I didn't hesitate for a single second to trigger the workshop's legal team to entirely cut the funding for Murillo's private college, revoke the study trust within a strict 48-hour deadline, and issue the immediate eviction order for the Moema property, registered exclusively in my name since the beginning of the marriage. The last interaction I had with my son happened in the glass visiting room of the police station, where he sat in a standard inmate uniform, his long hands handcuffed on the Formica counter and the red eyes of someone who finally understood the size of the abyss he dug for himself with university arrogance. He tried to cry, tried to lean on the hypocritical narrative that he'd been manipulated by his mother's greed, and begged me to pay for a renowned law firm on Paulista Avenue to save him from a criminal conviction in a closed regime. I just looked deep into those ambitious pupils. I rested my calloused grinding shop work hands on the glass counter and replied with the definitive clarity of someone who closed an account that should never have been opened. You'll never lay a hand on a single cent of those 12 million, Murillo. Your future will now be dictated by the penal code. And the only thing left between us is the silence you disdained so much in our house. I turned my back without looking once in the mental rearview mirror of that conversation. I left the concrete police station building and returned to my mechanic workshop in Moema to finish tuning the navy blue Santana's engine along with old Agenor Santos. We spent the rest of the afternoon working in total quiet, listening to the noise of the forged steel tools and the exact rhythm of the cylinders coming to new life under. While we drank that strong coffee brewed in the cloth strainer on the industrial back stove, I looked at the busy street through the sidewalk iron grate, watched the modern vehicles passing with their noisy rush, and felt a profound peace that no amount of cash be able to buy alone in the capital. The cost of discovering my own son's rottenness inside the house was immensely painful for my story, but that dawn spared me from spending the rest of my days, sharing the table and bread with my own executioners disguised as family. However, while I was wiping the bench with toast soaked in kerosene before locking the warehouse, the workshop phone rang again, bringing the trembling voice of the central Sao Paulo lawyer, with an urgent notification making my arm freeze in the air with the screwdriver in hand. Letitia's private detective had left a final document folder registered in a parallel notary office before her arrest, and the content of that paperwork contained information about my late mechanical father's past, which would completely change the origin of every cent of those 12 million reais I believed to be protected in my name. Dr. Otavio, you need to come to D.C. right now because what we found in that safety deposit box goes far beyond a simple survey of matrimonial assets. The duty delegate's hoarse voice leaked through my cell phone receiver, competing with the mechanical noise of the high-pressure washer old Agenor maneuvered on the workshop's back ramp. It was noon on Wednesday, just over 24 hours after Letitia's arrest in flagrante delicto at the building's concierge. The Moema warehouse maintained its usual grinding shop movement, the heavy air exuding that familiar odor of lubricating oil and machined iron, which always served as my psychological shield against the external world's betrayals. I held the device with fingers still stained by cylinder head gasket soot, feeling the cold sweat break out at the base of my neck while trying to decipher the urgency in the police authorities' intonation. I replied, I'd leave the work orders organized on the bench and take the navy blue Santana immediately to cross the South Zone towards the Criminal Investigations Department. I hung up the call, walked to the dark steel cabinet, where I kept the mechanical civil engineering manuals, and grabbed my denim jacket, ensuring the envelope with the 12 million reais signed to the notary remained perfectly intact in the inner lining. Old Agenor turned off the water compressor upon noticing my tense face, wiped his calloused hands on a worn toe, and stared at me with that look of quiet wisdom he accumulated in decades on the factory floor next to my late mechanical Turner father. He didn't ask me any tricky questions, didn't try to extract details about the progress of litigious criminal process, and limited himself to adjusting the position of a combination wrench set on the metal shelf, signaling he'd take care of the warehouse until my return. I left through the back of the establishment, got into the Volkswagen Santana, and started the engine, listening to the stable roar of the 2002 engine, which I myself had reviewed after discovering the surgical cut in the hydraulic lines. The trip to the specialized police station headquarters was an exercise in pure automotive attention through the central avenues of Sao Paulo, a route of irregular asphalt and synchronized traffic lights that seemed to drag the hours in my chronological perception. Upon parking the vehicle in the spot reserved for deponents, I noticed the feverish movement of criminal lawyers and investigators circulating on the public building's concrete stairs, a gray environment exuding bureaucracy and poorly kept secrets. I was escorted by a gray-haired inspector to an interrogation room at the back of the third floor, where the delegate was already waiting for me, standing next to a dark Formica table, full of rigid plastic folders and brown envelopes sealed with official tape. What caught my immediate attention weren't the copies of the automotive attempted murder inquiry, but rather a blue metal box with the faded logo of an old Minas Gerais bank branch that had closed its commercial activities back in the 90s. The delegate pulled up the plastic chair, signaled with his head for me to sit in front of the counter, and pushed a statement sheet typed the previous day so I could become aware of the progress of the real estate searches. He explained that during the sweep conducted at litigious office at the luxury brokerage in Jardins, agents found that metal box hidden behind a fake plaster panel, along with the reports from the private detective whom she'd hired to track my CPF. Your ex-wife wasn't just trying to take you out of circulation to inherit your great-uncle's money, Otavio. She spent the last months scouring the past of your father, Mr. Roberto Albuquerque, and discovered an old judicial custody account that had been frozen since 2012 in the mine's interior, revealed the authority, opening the box lid with a sharp metallic snap echoing in the room. It was in this exact second the danger of a legal plot twist almost made me lose the emotional stability I'd been maintaining since the sabotage dawn in the basement garage. The delegate took out from inside the blue structure a sequence of bank statements yellowed by time, and a supplementary will drafted in a Conagem notary office, whose old handwriting I instantly recognized as being that of my late mechanical Turner father. Adrenaline rushed up my back, like high-pressure oil in a cast engine, when my eyes focused on the numbers printed on those old sheets. The 12 million Reyes inheritance I believe came exclusively from my great-uncle's assets was, in fact, the payment of an industrial patent rights compensation my father had received in absolute secrecy before passing away in 2018. I gripped the edges of the Formica table tightly, forcing my jaw muscles to remain perfectly locked so as not to show the shock of realizing the story of simplicity my father sold me in childhood carried a layer of asset concealment identical to the one I adopted with my own family. Before I could formulate any technical question about the legality of that real estate discovery, the interrogation room door swung open and Murillo's defense lawyer entered the room, holding a corporate notebook and a stack of civil law sheets. The young defender, an elegant figure with a tailored suit, completely clashing with that police environment, measured my denim jacket with professional disdain and placed the papers on the counter with an academic haughtiness immediately reminding me of my son's arrogance at the dinner table. He turned to the delegate, ignoring my physical presence with a calculated arrogance, and stated litigious arrest in flagrante delicto contained a severe procedural nullity defect, and Murillo had already signed a habeas corpus petition to answer the complicity charge on provisional release. If we have forensic proof the industrial cutting tool found in my client's bag originally belonged to the Moima grinding shop's inventory stock, indicating Mr. Otavio Albuquerque might have forged the sabotage himself to incriminate his ex-wife and avoid the divorce division of assets. Fired the lawyer, pointing his index finger towards my calloused chest with a legal insolence. testing the limits of my mechanical patience. The accusation floated in the room's heavy air like an imminent threat, capable of blocking the validation of the 12 million reis at the notary office and inverting the role from victim to investigated before the Sao Paulo Court Justice. If the lawyer managed to convince the duty judge the hidden cameras in spot 42 had been digitally manipulated or the brake fluid spilled on the reinforced concrete was just a mechanical staging, litigious empire of lies gain a dangerous legal survival. I kept my eyes fixed on the defender's face, pulled my father's notebook from inside my denim jacket pocket, and replied with the definitive clarity of a mechanical civil engineer perfectly knowing the laws of physics and industrial metallurgy. I said the industrial pressure pliers used in the crime had a specific torque marking not corresponding to any of the tools registered in my Moima Workshop's balance sheet, and the corrosive chemical compound injected into the rubber seals was for the exclusive use of large transport companies Murillo frequented during his academic internships. I showed the delegate the purchase invoice for the digital monitoring system with end-to-end encryption, whose access key was inviolable and textually attested the Monday dawn images were generated without any kind of editing or time gap in the recording. The criminal lawyer paled slightly upon realizing his mechanical frame-up thesis collapsed in the face of cold forensic data, closing the civil law sheets with a dull thud and leaving the room with hurried steps down the gray corridor. The delegate collected the yellowed Minas Gerais statements, put the mechanical turners wheel back in the blue box, and stared at me with a look of involuntary respect, confirming the truth had triumphed over academic arrogance on that third floor. He held out his hand to sign my release from the testimony, warning the indictment for attempted aggravated murder for a vile motive against Letitia was already formally accepted by the public ministry, and the preventive arrest warranted remain active indefinitely in the state capital. Which I thanked the police authorities' sobriety, gathered my papers from the counter, and walked towards the DIC exit, feeling the weight of that revelation about my father's past settle in my mind like an engine block needing to be completely disassembled on the workshop bench. Upon returning to the basement where the navy blue Volkswagen Santana was parked, the silence of the reinforced concrete was broken by the echo of slow footsteps coming from the direction of the official vehicle's access ramp. I approached the side of the car, holding the keys with firm fingers, but stopped immediately upon visualizing Murillo's silhouette standing next to the front fender, wearing the same wrinkled suit from the custody hearing and keeping his arms crossed with a face mixing humiliation and a dangerous juvenile haughtiness. The boy no longer carried the genuine leather briefcase nor the expensive phones he flaunted at the private college. His eyes were red, his pale cheeks denounced the impact of 48 hours of isolation in the transit jail. But his jaw remained rigid, with the same disdain he used to criticize my simplicity at the Moima dinner table. He took a step towards me, ignoring the authorities' protocol distance, and spoke with a voice coming out trembling with contained fury, revealing his departure from the Alameda Dos Maracatans property wouldn't be accepted without a final legal retaliation he himself had articulated in the shadows of the police station. Your mechanical silence won't protect you for long, Otavio. Mom's detective didn't just dig up the grinding shop's tax data. He discovered the notebook you carry from Grandpa Roberto hides the signature of a drawer contract invalidating the entire transfer of these 12 million reis to your name before the divorce's first instance is judged. Hissed the law student with a cutting smile, leaving in the air the harbinger of a new legal storm, whose consequences I still couldn't measure in the darkness of that cement parking lot. Do you really think a crumpled sheet of paper will annul 30 years of technical expertise and a decision signed by a judge, Murillo? My right hand slapped against the Volkswagen Santana's steel plate roof, with a snap echoing through the gray DIC reinforced concrete basement. The impact of skin on metal cut the boy's hissing provocation, reverberating between the structural columns and the electrical wiring pipes crossing the parking lot ceiling. I held the keys to the 2002 car firmly between my greasy fingers, keeping my eyes locked on the law student's bloodshot pupils, whose face trembled under the dim light of the mercury ballasts. All the academic haughtiness he'd tried to rescue upon leaving the provisional jail seemed to clash against the icy coldness I cultivated since the instant he saw the hydraulic fluid leak in the Moima garage. He took a step back with an involuntary jolt, his poorly polished leather shoes clicking on the damp cement, demonstrating the physical proximity to his mechanic father still caused him an instinctive discomfort legal theses couldn't appease. I pulled my body away from the vehicle's navy blue side with calculated slowness. I walked to the center of the parking space and bent my torso to face my own son's pale face, with the authority of someone knowing perfectly the engineering of every gear involved in that dispute. Murillo kept his wrinkled suit jacket tucked under his left arm, his long fingers scratching the fabric with a feverish haste, betraying the despair of someone realizing they're cornered by the legal machinery he himself helped lubricate against me. There was no longer the real estate safety net Letitia used to erect at the Alameda Dos Maracadans meetings, nor the looks of complicit approval feeding his arrogance during Sunday dinners in the Sao Paulo South Zone. He was alone in the support jail, stripped of the appearances he used to flaunt in the private college courtyard. But the corrosive arrogance inherited from his mother was still there, operating as a final defense mechanism against the floor of operational reality. The drawer contract the detective located at the Jardins Real Estate Agency is stamped with the seal of the old Conagem autarky, Otavio, and carries a buyback clause transferring 50% of any of Grandpa Roberto's industrial rights to my mother's family estate in case of a litigious dissolution, insisted the young man, raising his voice in a shrill tone, making the duty inspector look in our direction with his hand resting. On the leather holster, he pulled a photocopied copy blurred by cheap toner used from his suit's inner pocket, extending the sheets towards my eyes with an insistence testing the limits of the emotional calibration I kept from my late mechanical Turner father's lessons. Adrenaline circulated rapidly through my arteries when I realized the paper displayed the trembling and aged signature of the old miner's engineer, dated exactly from the year 2012, the exact period the Moima grinding shop started billing its first significant dividends. The chessboard of that family betrayal threatened to collapse the structure of the 12 million reis. In the exact instant the danger of a discovery almost destroyed my financial secrecy before the civil authorities watching the cement courtyard. If Murillo walked back to the delegate's office with that old Minas Gerais paperwork, or if the criminal lawyers attested the origin of the third notary's funds was linked to an industrial patent fraud, my victim status be immediately revoked by the court. I needed to examine the content of that buyback clause, without letting the boy notice my technical nervousness, keeping my face perfectly level, while thinking of a bureaucratic engineering project to neutralize the law student's attack. I made a quick movement with my arm. I simulated the Santana keys had slipped from my fingers towards the floor's concrete block and bent my body to pick up the metal on the ground, purposely dragging my left leg against Murillo's tailoring pants to destabilize his balance. In the exact second the young man leaned in so as not to fall on the car's navy blue fender, I reached out my soot-stained hand and snatched the photocopied copy from his fingers with a firm yank, hiding the sheets under the diesel engine technical manual I carried in my denim jacket. The law student froze with his chest arched forward, his face oscillating between the shock of losing the document and visible disgust, upon noticing the palm of my hand had left a dark mark of grease and lubricating oil on the imported fabric of his designer suit jacket. "You've gone crazy, Otavio. This copy is property of the legal team handling my mother's defense. And I'm going right now to report to the judge you physically assaulted me inside the Diak basement to hide material evidence of the divorce," ranted the young man, wiping the fabric with an old toe he found on the metal trash can with a latent irritation denouncing his academic panic. I kept my rubber slippers glued to the cement, rested my back against the Santana's glass, and replied with that cold and steady voice I used to dictate work orders at the Moima grinding shop. I said the blurred sheet was nothing more than a draft with no legal authenticity value at the notary, and if he tried to present a 2012 drawer contract lacking notarized signatures and without paying the mandatory state fees, The only consequence be his immediate expulsion from the Bar Association before even getting his university degree. The silence loaded with static electricity took over the underground parking lot again for a few moments. The kind of tense pause where the noise of civil police, squad cars maneuvering in the adjacent spots, seemed to count the seconds remaining for the end of that domestic farce. Murillo held my gaze with thick, furrowed eyebrows, his teeth locked, in an expression of impotent fury, confirming his law student haughtiness was nothing more than an empty shell against the cold math of criminal reality. He picked up the canvas backpack from the floor with a sharp pull, adjusted his wrinkled clothes with an irritated tongue click, and walked toward the pedestrian ramp, without looking at the navy blue vehicle that had financed his academic journey in the Sao Paulo capital. Your mechanical arrogance is going to collapse at Monday's real estate hearing, Otavio, because Mom didn't sign that prenuptial agreement folder without first leaving a trump card registered at the Central Forum, which not even your old Agenor will be able to fix with grinding tools, shouted the boy before disappearing in the brightness of the external sidewalk. I let the air out slowly through my mouth, got into the Volkswagen Santana, and started the engine, listening to the stable roar of the cylinders responding perfectly to my mechanical care, although my mind was focused on the mystery of that Conagen paperwork. I drove the car back to the Moima warehouse, keeping my eyes fixed on the side rearview mirrors to ensure litigious private investigator wasn't monitoring my driving route through the avenues of Sao Paulo's South Zone. The streets were taken over by the cold late afternoon fog, a scene of red headlights and noisy rush, seeming to reflect the urgency with which I needed to disarm that luxury real estate broker's final legal trap. Upon parking the vehicle on the workshop's cement floor, I noticed old Agenor Santos was already putting the torque wrenches away on the cast steel shelf, the old worker's face, marked by the quietness of someone knowing my family's history. Since my youth, in the Minas Gerais interior, I left my leather briefcase on the wooden desk, pulled the blurred, photocopied copy from inside my denim jacket, and called the old mechanic to the corner of the pantry. Under the yellowish light of the industrial metal lamp, I showed my late mechanical turner father's old handwriting and the mention of the Contagem autarky. Watching how Agenor's white eyes fixated on those lines with a gravity making the smell of grease and brewed coffee seemed to freeze in the workshop environment. He ran his calloused hands over the edge of the letterhead paper with reverent respect. He let out a deep sigh of someone about to open a floodgate of secrets remaining sealed since the year 2012 and faced my mechanical civil engineer face with a look of pure ethical distress. Otavio, my dear boy, your father Roberto didn't hide this drawer contract out of materialistic vanity nor to paralyze Letitia during the marriage in the capital, revealed old Agenor, cleaning his glasses patched with electrical tape on a piece of clean tow before continuing. He explained the industrial patent right, originating the 12 million reais, was linked to a safety project for heavy-load truck axles the old Turner had developed in his youth, but the initial investor financing the prototype belonged to litigious political family lineage. The revelation fell on my head, like the thud of a cast engine block on the grinding bench, undoing the narrative of working-class purity I'd built about my father's past, and demonstrating litigious greed had a much deeper historical root than the simple Jardin's real estate dissatisfaction. Before I could formulate the next technical question about the statutes of limitations of that buyback clause, the landline fixed to the pantry wall rang with a shrill insistence, making old Agenor interrupt the account immediately in the room. I ran my fingers over the dark plastic receiver, answered the call maintaining my voice's icy calibration, and froze upon hearing litigious criminal lawyer's ironic tone, speaking directly from the Sao Paulo Central Forum duty desk. The lawyer stated the search and seizure petition for the physical files of my father's notebook had already been granted by the duty judge today, and the court officers were already on their way to the Moima workshop to seal the warehouse's iron doors before the shift ended. The legal threat floated in the air with the weight of an immediate eviction order, and I realized, looking at the iron gate facing the sidewalk, the next 10 minutes determine whether the 12 million remain protected in my name or if litigious farce managed to shut down the mechanical grinding shop before night fell over the Paulista Avenue. The navy blue Santana's engine was still clicking with the cooling heat in the center of the warehouse, when the harsh sound of 2 heavy knocks on the main gate's iron plate echoed throughout the Moima grinding shop. Court officers bring the establishment's key and immediately open access to execute the search warrant, shouted a male voice coming from the external sidewalk, accompanied by the intermittent reflection of the police squad car's gyroscopes supporting the legal procedure. Old Agenor Santos dropped the socket set on the wooden counter with a dull thud. The old mechanic's face locked in a rigidity demonstrating the fear of seeing the history of that workshop being shut down by litigious real estate rush. I walked slowly to the wooden desk, grabbed my late mechanical turner father's notebook and the letterhead envelope of the 12 million reis I'd signed to the notary, storing them in the inner lining of my denim jacket with the precision of someone adjusting a precision part on the assembly bench. The iron door slid along the tracks with a shrill creak, revealing the silhouette of 2 Court of Justice employees, holding rigid plastic folders with the official seals of the state of Sao Paulo. Behind them, Murilo Albuquerque sported a cutting smile in the corner of his lips. The tailoring suit jacket now clean of the grease mark, but the law student's eyes remained injected with the same ambitious urgency he'd been showing since the beginning of the divorce. The young lawyer handling litigious defense pointed the corporate notebook in my direction, as if the technological apparatus was an infallible weapon capable of confiscating my father's technical memory and freezing my corporate accounts before the first instance process. I kept my steps perfectly level in the dust on the floor. I rested my arms on the service counter and faced the officers' faces with the icy calm, becoming my true mechanical survival mechanism in the face of family arrogance. We have the immediate search and seizure order for any and all physical documents, notebooks, or industrial patent registries drafted by Mr. Roberto Albuquerque between the years 2012 and 2018, declared the older court officer, extending the letterhead sheet with the duty judge's signature a few centimeters from my eyes. Murilo took a step forward with clenched fists, his long fingers sweeping the cast steel shelf, with a latent suspicion denouncing he knew perfectly well the exact location where the old Turner kept his Minas Gerais memories. It was in this exact second of extreme proximity the danger of a discovery almost ruined all the legal engineering of my family heritage. The volume of my father's leather notebook forced the denim jacket's internal seam, making the aged edge of the paper stick out from the fabric in front of my own son's attentive face. The boy noticed the dark bulge on my chest, extended his long arm quickly, with a startle betraying his total lack of paternal reverence, and tried to snatch the notebook straight from my inner pocket to hand it to the Central Forum employees. If his fingers touched that old handwriting, or if the court officers seized the supplementary while bringing the data from the Conagem judicial custody account, the bankruptcy farce be destroyed before I could present the interlocutory appeal. Adrenaline rushed through my arteries, like oil under high pressure in a defective hydraulic pump, demanding a millimeter maneuver to dodge my body and neutralize the law student's attack before the flagrant was consummated. I pulled my left shoulder back with the speed of someone dodging a cylinder head at the grinding shop. I hit my right elbow against Murilo's forearm to interrupt his movement and replied with a technical lie structured with the icy coldness I inherited from the factory floor of my working-class youth. I said the volume under my jacket was just the instruction manual for the digital micrometer old Agenor had ordered for measuring aluminum pistons, and if he tried to violate the workshop's assets without my technical assistant's presence, the process suffer an immediate nullity for breaking the chain of custody. To support the automotive farce, I pulled an industrial screwdriver from my waist. I tapped the plastic handle on a navy blue Santana's metal to divert the civil authorities' attention and started dictating isolated tool codes as if cataloging the grinding shop's inventory before the court officers. Murilo stepped back with his arms suspended in the air, the boy's face oscillating between university arrogance and ignorance about Moima's forensic procedures, allowing me to push the leather notebook deep into the lining with an imperceptible gesture. This cheapskate is mocking this court's authority. Doctor, he has my grandfather's industrial patent records, hidden in this grease-stained garment, and I demand you carry out an immediate personal search on him," ranted the law student, wiping the cold sweat from his pale cheeks, with an irritated tongue click, demonstrating the despair of someone feeling cornered by time. Litigious criminal lawyer intervened with an academic haughtiness, but the older court officer examined the terms of the judicial warrant with sobriety, shook his head negatively, and stated the judge's order was limited to physical goods stored in the workshop property and didn't cover the corporal search of the mechanical civil engineer. The court employees spent the next 30 minutes searching the steel drawers and metal cabinets of the warehouse, collecting only old work orders and diesel engine manuals, containing no relevance to the divorce's division of physical assets. They signed a real estate procedures closure term with a face of professional boredom. They closed the plastic folders and left the Moima warehouse, accompanied by litigious defender, whose mechanical frame-up thesis collapsed given the absence of physical evidence in the room. Murillo remained standing near the iron gate for a few more seconds, his eyes injected with fury, staring at my navy blue Santana with the same disdain he used to criticize my simplicity at the Alameda Dos Maracatans dinner table. I walked slowly towards him, locked the entrance latch with a firm click, and stared at the young man's trembling face with a silence carrying the definitive weight of 21 years of fatherhood undone by university greed. Your academic arrogance left you with no brakes and in the hands of the penal code, Murillo. Starting today, you no longer have a father, you no longer have this grinding shop support, and your deadline to vacate the Moima property ends exactly in the next 48 hours, I declared with an intonation coming out as heavy as a cast iron block of a machined engine on the bench. The boy swallowed hard, the cadaverous pallor taking over his cheeks, while realizing his allowance and the funding for his private law school had been entirely deleted by the pen of justice he himself had tried to manipulate. He turned his back, without uttering a single word of regret, disappearing into the cold fog of the Moima sidewalk, while the echo of his hurried steps vanished into the shrill noise of the Sao Paulo South Zone avenues. I let the air out slowly through my mouth. I walked to the back of the pantry, where old Agenor Santos was already brewing strong coffee in the cloth strainer on the industrial stove, and pulled my late mechanical turner father's notebook from inside my denim jacket to examine the 2012 drawer contract sheet. If you want to witness how justice bends the greedy without needing to raise its voice, subscribe to the channel now, because I guarantee you won't regret following every step of this legal plot twist. We sat at the dark wooden pantry table, under the yellowish lighting of the metal lamp, the smell of kerosene and brewed coffee serving as a frame for the conclusion of that long journey of asset concealment and family betrayals. Old Agenor adjusted his glasses patched with electrical tape, ran his calloused fingers over the lines written by old Roberto Albuquerque, and revealed to me the judicial custody account in Conagem contained the official cancellation signed by litigious family back in the year 2018. A few weeks before the mechanical turner's passing, the ex-wife's signature on the original division proved textually she'd already received her share of the real estate rights in the past, and the attempted sabotage of the Santana and the search and seizure at the workshop were nothing more than an act of pure financial extortion motivated by the late discovery of the 12 million Reyes inheritance. Litigious empire of lies was definitively buried under the cold paragraphs of penal law, and the Sao Paulo Public Ministry maintained the Jardins luxury broker's preventive detention for attempted aggravated murder for a vile motive and without the right to any kind of bank bail. I irrevocably cut my son Murillo Albuquerque's study trust within the strict deadline determined by the workshop's legal team, notifying the educational institution about the termination of payments and ordering the immediate eviction from the residential apartment. The last interaction I had with my son occurred in the glass visiting room of the police station, where he sat in the wrinkled clothes of the penitentiary system, his hands handcuffed on the counter and the red eyes of someone who finally understood the size of the abyss he dug for himself with university arrogance. He tried to cry. He begged for a portion of the inheritance, to pay a renowned lawyer on Paulista Avenue and try to blame his mother's ambition for the Don's sabotage in the condo basement garage. I just stared deep into those greedy pupils, rested my calloused mechanical engineer hands on the counter, and replied with the definitive clarity of someone who closed an account that should never have been opened. You'll never lay a hand on a single cent of those 12 million, Murillo. Your future will now be dictated by the cells of the closed regime. And the only thing left between us is the silence you disdained so much at our dinner table. I turned my back, left that gray reinforced concrete building, and returned to my grinding shop in Moima to finish tuning the 2002 Navy Blue Santana's engine, along with old Agenor Santos. We spent the rest of the afternoon working in total quietness, listening to the soft roar of the cylinders coming to new life under our forged steel tools and savoring the profound peace of someone who protected their own life and assets with the dignity of the factory floor. The cost of discovering my own son's rottenness inside the house was immensely painful for my personal history, but that dawn spared me from spending the rest of my days sharing bread and the table with my own executioners disguised as family. However, while I was wiping the wooden bench with a toe soaked in kerosene before locking the warehouse's iron doors, old Agenor pointed to a small hidden compartment inside the blue Minas Gerais toolbox, revealing a second envelope sealed with red wax, which my father had instructed to be opened only on the day the division was totally pacified in the capital, containing a map of geographic coordinates in the state's interior, indicating the 12 million reis were just the superficial armor of a much bigger secret the old mechanical turner had buried under the soil of our old rural property before departing.